Welcome to Women at Halftime podcast, but not just for women, for you men too. If you're at mid-career or the halftime of life, our inspirational topics are not only fun, but also meant to help you maximize and write your next chapter. Right here with me, Deborah Johnson. Well, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome Christopher Penn today. I'm so excited for this interview because the geeky side of me is coming out with AI and machine learning. Do not want anybody to shut this off because of those terms, because we are going to dispel some of the myths and with Christopher's brilliance in this, when I was president of our National Speaking Association, our chapter, he was one of my first guests to come in. I just loved what he had to say. And I'm looking forward to this. Thank you so much, Christopher, for coming with us today. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having me.
It's an honor. To remind everyone, the focus of this podcast, I usually focus on those mid-career, halftime of life, but it really relates to everyone, especially this topic. I have a new book called Stop Circling, so make sure you check that out. And also that you're on our newsletter, because I do write an article every single week, and the one with this interview will be coming out. So you'll want to make sure that you get onto that list, goalsforyourlife.com/newsletter, because I'll put a lot of extra links in and hopefully some helpful hints that come directly from Christopher. So, well, Christopher, I'd like to give my guests just a brief, you could spend the whole time telling us about your bio because you've done so much. Can you give a couple sentences of your background and what your expertise, why we're talking about AI and machine learning today?
Sure. So I'm the co-founder and chief data scientist of TrustInsights.ai. We're a marketing and management consulting firm. And for the last 10 years or so, I've been exploring machine learning, AI applications in marketing and how people can be using these technologies to get some benefit from them. And also, obviously, what the implications are when these technologies kind of don't do either what they're supposed to do, or more likely, people are using them in ways that you might not necessarily think are good ideas.
Great. Well, you've had so many awards. We would not have time to list them today. From working with tons of companies and on their, you've consulted the whole thing on this subject. So that's why it's such a pleasure to have you here for this podcast. But you're also able, and what I know about you is you are able to explain some of these maybe foggy sort of subjects for people in a way that they could understand. So what I'd like to do first is for you to explain machine learning and how it's related to AI, artificial intelligence, because this is a growing field. People better get on board and just at least understand it, even if you're not technically, inclined. We can all understand this. So can you explain a little bit of that for us?
Sure. So artificial intelligence is a blanket sort of umbrella term for teaching computers to perform intelligence tasks that normally humans do. For example, listening to people speaking words and turning that into some kind of understanding, natural language processing, seeing an image of something and understanding it, computer vision. So AI covers this big, broad spectrum. Within AI is what is called machine learning, which is the process by how machines can do these tasks. Normally, humans write software and then the software creates outputs that we do something with. For example, you have Microsoft Word on your computer, probably, or something like it. Humans wrote that code. That code allows humans to do stuff in it, and you have an output, a Word document, an interoffice memo to ask people not to microwave fish in the break room, whatever. Machine learning is where computers are given a large amount of data, and they're told, based on the patterns in this data, you write your own software that computer will use to create outputs. So when we talk about machine learning and we talk about, for example, large language models or any of these or any kind of AI model, you're really just talking about software written by a machine for a machine to use.
So it's machine to machine instead of man to machine.
Exactly.
Okay.
And
yeah.
We do have interfaces to some of these models. For example, if you've heard of the software interface ChatGPT, right?
Yes.
ChatGPT is a human interface to the GPT-4 model, which is the machine software. And the interface converts what we're saying into language the machine model can understand, it can use, and then it converts what that machine model spits out back into stuff that we can use: words, poetry, song lyrics, whatever.
Yes, because Chat GPT will give you a list of things, if you want to put it in, because I write my own material, but I've used now Chat GPT for some of the research and, just some ideas. Kind of, I'm a create all the time. So, but it will give you a list. Okay, so tell me 10 things. I just wrote an article about Mother's Day. I did all my research, made sure I got my right sources, but give me a list of some of the common background of how Mother's Day came to be. So you can get a list, or what are some common memes that you can create for Mother's Day, some sayings or something. And that on Chat GPT does pretty well. Although it seems to be, kind of a blanket. I think the last research on Chat GPT was 2021. Is that correct, Christopher?
For what it knows factually, yes, its cutoff date is roughly September of 2021. The thing that people need to understand about using large language models is that they're not really designed to be used like a search engine. They are designed to be used to structure and restructure text. That's why they're called a large language model. And there's really 6 areas that they're good at, right? They're good at generation, right? Write me a blog post about this. They are good at extraction. So taking data and extracting out information from it. For example, you can give it a whole bunch of emails and say, extract out the key figures or the key data points. They are really good at summarization, to be able to take something lengthy and summarize it. One of my favorite tricks with a large language model is to give it something I don't fully understand. And I will say, summarize this and explain it in terms of pizza. And it will go through and explain a complex concept like, say, quantum superposition in terms of pizza. And you're like, oh, okay, now I understand. When you talk about, for example, large language models, you have things like model parameters and model weights. Model parameters are the different ingredients on a pizza, and the model weights are how many of the ingredients there are on the pizza. Like, oh, okay, now I understand how this thing works. They are good at rewriting. They are really good at rewriting, taking existing text and turning it into something else. For example, you could say, rewrite this paragraph in a professional tone of voice. There's a post up on LinkedIn that I did that's got like 500,000 views now, of an email from Karen to Bob in accounting. Bob was asking, where's this thing? And Karen's like, you can't give me 2 months worth of invoicing data and expect to be done tomorrow. F off, and I'll see you. It'll be done when it's done. And it says, now rewrite this in a professional tone of voice, and get this nice long email. But you can also do things like rewrite this in Sumerian, right? Rewrite this entirely in emoji, things like that. It is really good at question answering, right? Being able to answer questions as long as the knowledge is there and it's been trained on it. And fundamentally, these tools are good at classification. So being able to say, okay, what kind of text is this? Score the sentiment of this text, score the psychological profile of the writer. What topics is this block of text about? So those are the 6 things that large language models are really good at. And that is a small part of machine learning. So you have AI, you have machine learning, and then within there is actually technically what's called deep learning. And then from there is there is natural language processing, and then there is large language models. But that's what everyone's talking about today, because it's accessible to the non-technical user, right? You go into a web browser, you ask this thing a question, or you say, write me some song lyrics for about an upcoming anniversary, and people can understand, oh, I can make this thing do stuff. It's not, here's the intercept and the regression coefficient of this model. People would be like, and?
You would understand that, but most people would not understand that. I don't even understand that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, Christopher, this was great. I put a star by by some of those 6 things. And it's going to help me. Actually, I'm going to be learning through this too, of just the summarization, because I don't use it nearly what I could with the Chat GPT. And, that's free. I mean, that most people can just be on there free. And I know you kind of help people just to be able to access some free tools, which is great. That's part of what your business. We'll put all of that in the links. But the summarization, the rewriting, that's interesting in different voices. And I have heard that, but I've just not experimented with it. It takes a little time to do that. And then with your question answer, that's interesting. And with the classification, all of those little areas, those are very user friendly for most of us in the terms that you put out there. So that's actually exciting. But you did hit on something, and we'll go off on a tiny little rabbit trail here. When it's accessible to the non-user, but when you say writing song lyrics, there's a big deal right now. I'm a creator, I'm a songwriter. I've done it for years. I have a lot of things published. I have a lot of things copywritten and trademarked as well. So when you talk about intellectual property, what are some of the guidelines that most of us need to go by when you say, oh, create some song lyrics, or create, a poem, or, where did that really come from? Did that come from somewhere else, that it's gaining some of the previous information, and now you have a copyright infringement? Can you touch on that just a bit?
Sure. So there's 2 aspects of copyright that are really important. One, these models are created by analyzing the statistical probabilities of word distributions. So if, for example, if I say, I pledge allegiance to the next word is logically probably not going to be rutabaga, right? Statistically, if you absorb an enormous amount of text from all over the internet, statistically, the next probable word is flag in that sentence, right? So what these models contain essentially are tables and tables and tables of probabilities. The original text that they were trained on is not in the model. The original words are not in there. It is only a matrix of numbers. So can a model spit out something verbatim that was written somewhere else? It is possible for it to do that because it is statistics, and the probability exists, particularly if it's a niche sentence or topic where there isn't a lot of what's called training data to begin with. For example, if you were talking about, say, RNA sequences on the COVID spike protein, right? There's not that many people that have written about that. So there's a higher probability if you ask it to write about that it's going to create words that sound like something someone else has already written. But the original text is not in there. And there is no way for a company or a person to say, like, yes, for sure, my stuff is in there, particularly if you write about things that other people also write about, right? If you write about, say, empowerment, there's a lot of people who write about that. There's a lot of text about that. And so your individual take may or may not be in there, but for sure the topic overall is, and what's going to come out is a mathematical blending of that. How specific the results are depends on what you ask. So when we talk to these machines, we are doing what's called prompt engineering. We give it a prompt, and the more specific and detailed the language is in that prompt, the better the results are, because the software looks at the words in our prompt and says, what are the probability distributions of the words that we're asking? And then says, okay, I'm going to connect that to the huge library of probabilities that I have and spit out language that matches those probabilities. So if I say, write a post about B2B marketing, right? There's very little language to capture. And so it will generate a very, very generic, boring, bland piece of content because it only has a few probabilities. If I say, write a blog post about B2B marketing with an emphasis on churn reduction and how B2B marketing practices can improve your compound annual growth rate in a service industry like industrial concrete. Now this model's got so many more words to work with, and it can have more guardrails to say, okay, clearly, let's ignore the probabilities around an art studio. Let's ignore the probabilities around an independent author. Let's focus solely on the concrete industry. And so that's how these things work. They're all probability machines. Now, here's the flip side The U.S. Copyright Office, so this is USA specific, depending on where you're listing, this will vary based on your local laws. The U.S. Copyright Office has said that machine generated content is ineligible for copyright. If you write a blog post with ChatGPT and it does the writing, it is ineligible for copyright. You may not copyright it, you may not claim it as your own. You do not own it, and anyone else can use it. So, for example, if it becomes, say, a top performing blog post on your blog, and there are tools that can somewhat reliably detect AI generated content. But if a competitor sees that blog post and ascertains that in fact it is entirely machine written, they can copy and paste it right on their blog, and there's nothing you can do about it because you don't own it.
So if Disney had created Mickey Mouse through, some sort of AI generated, that would be public domain already. Now, some of their stuff is coming in public domain, but it's the early versions. It's not the regular, Mickey Mouse that we see now. So, and they've been so influential about copyright law and extending the time because they want to keep all of those. That is very, very interesting. And I think it's a relief for any content creator, because one of the fears that you have when you're creating content is that you're going to be tagged for copyright infringement. I mean, even, YouTube, if I put my copyright on songs that I've written, I've been tagged before for my songs. And I have to prove this is my material. I recorded this. This is the album. This is where it is. So, but it's very much of, they've got those guardrails. So that's very interesting though. And that's new information for me on the actual copyright on that you can't copyright that. If you get ideas from it and it becomes your own composition, that's different. But if it's entirely from the, from a chat GPT, this is just a poem they put out. But I've found by using it, it's not always to the quality I want anyway. So anything I get, you have to research, but it gives you ideas. So that's the good thing about it. But I've not been as detailed in putting in, when you said that sentence of, the guardrails was like, that was very specific. So using it that way, I think, would be very beneficial for some people in some fields, and it's fun to experiment with it if you have time. So, well, what are some of those? Let's kind of get back to what those machine learning and how we can use it if we are an entrepreneur or we are in a business. How can we use this, the machine learning, or the AI is what we want, right? Because the machine learning is actually the learning within the AI, so the umbrella of AI, and how people are afraid they're losing their jobs and the lower paying jobs, but I always say there's going to be jobs replacing that, as long as you are equipping yourself in the ability. We still need people. We still need intelligence. We need those human bodies. So how can an entrepreneur or even a small business, if you've not even dipped your foot into this, what are some of the steps they can start using?
The first question is, what's the problem you're trying to solve, right? Artificial intelligence and really any technology is a tool. It's like a chainsaw. There are things you should and should not do with a chainsaw. You probably should not use it for home redecorating. You probably should not use it for cutting cakes and pizzas, right? It can do those things. It's just not a particularly good fit for them. You probably should not use it for dental surgery. Again, it can technically do it. You probably won't like the results. And so that's the big question to start with is what problems do you have that are repeatable and that solving them would scale, right? Because again, technology is good at repetition and scale. Even the very sophisticated large language models, they allow us to tackle more complex, repeatable problems, but they're still repeatable problems. Oh, I've got to write a blog post about something. Oh, I've got to send an email about something. I've got to write a new book about something. These are repeatable problems. They are, so the question is, okay, what problems do I have that are repeatable in nature? And then are there existing tools in the marketplace that solve those problems in a satisfactory way? And this is where it gets murky for a lot of folks, because if you look on LinkedIn, for example, you will see folks summarizing what's been happening in the AI industry. There are a couple hundred new companies starting up in the AI space a week. So hundreds of new companies a week. 99% of them won't be around in a year. We know that. But there are still a lot of candidates out there for specific tasks. Another big thing to look at is in the software you're already using, there probably is some level of AI, chances are, and there'll be more. Towards the end of this year, Microsoft will be rolling out what's called Copilot in Microsoft Office, which will allow you to use a large language model within Microsoft Office, doing things like make a 10-slide presentation from this memo, right? And it will use generative AI to do so. Write a blog post from this Excel document. It's very, very straightforward things like that. So you'll be doing that anyway. Google at Google I/O last week just announced, okay, help me write this email. Will be coming to Gmail, so that you can sit there and go, I don't know what to say to this person, or you can, if you're like Karen talking to Bob, like, F off, I'm not doing this because you're an idiot. It will help you say that in a more professional way. Those are the things that are coming, whether or not people want them. Like they will be available as features, whether or not you ask for them. So it probably is a good idea to use them. And this gets back to something that I think is really important for people to understand. A job is a series of tasks. Now, the Brookings Institute said AI will take tasks, not jobs, right? Which is a true statement. Your job is a collection of disparate tasks. AI will be able to do more and more of those tasks. So you will not lose your job to AI. You will lose your job to someone who is skilled with AI. So a person who is skilled with AI will take the job of someone who is not. That is the future. And a person who is skilled with AI, you need fewer of them. Right? Because a person who's skilled with AI has like a 10x impact over someone who's not. If I have to write 100 blog posts, right, I can hire 10 writers to crank out 10 things. Or I can hire one person who's skilled with AI to do 100 first drafts with machines and then go through and fix them up, tune them up, etc. So yes, there will be job losses. The estimates, depending on the economist you talk to, will be between 30 to 50% of what are considered white-collar jobs, knowledge jobs. This is something that I've been calling the intelligence revolution, right? We had the Industrial Revolution 150 years ago, where you no longer have thousands of people working in a single field, right? Now you have one farm or a giant mechanical combine that's powered by GPS, and that farmer's sitting there listening to podcasts as this massive machine is harvesting, a huge amount of soybeans. That was the Industrial Revolution. We have assembly lines now for automakers where machines are assembling cars in their entirety. And yes, there are people who work on those lines. They supervise the machines. That was the Industrial Revolution. We are now having the Intelligence Revolution, where knowledge work is going to undergo the same sort of transformation. There will be the people who will be employed will, on average, get higher pay, right? Because they're more valuable. They will be supervising the machines, but there will be far fewer of them. You will not need 1,000 people or 10,000 people doing a certain function. You will have 10 doing that function, supervising that function, with machines doing most of the work. And so that's kind of what the future looks like. That said, there's also a big question mark of what will take its place. Like 10 years ago, there was no such thing as making a living on TikTok, right? 20 years ago, there was no such thing as making a living on YouTube. Right. These are service industries that have appeared in the case. Again, there's not many people at the top of these pyramids, but they do exist. So the opportunity does exist. We just don't know what form it's going to take. We do, and this is something I believe very strongly, as citizens of the world, not any one particular nation, but of the world, we need to be having serious conversations within our countries with our elected officials, regardless of your political orientation, about things like universal basic income. Because there will be a lot of people. There are a lot of people in the knowledge industry, in the intelligence industry, that will not have work because machines are able to do it. There was an experiment being done last week. Someone has started wiring investment portfolios to ChatGPT, and it outperformed the market by 4x, and it outperformed anything that firm had done. And so now that particular financial services firm is like, so 400% profit in a week. How can we do more of this? Right. And who do we not need to employ anymore because the machines are doing a better job?
Yes, and I think your point is to have a conversation, because a lot of people don't want to talk about these things because they get politically on one side or the other. And I think if we could sit down and talk about it and be educated, know what's involved, know what people need to do for the next step. I mean, when the automobile started, being mass produced or even produced at all, the people with horse and buggies thought that was the end of the world. Oh my gosh, we can't let that happen. Oh my goodness, there's going to be, that the end of, our regular mode of transportation, everything else. They were just really scared of it. So I want to kind of dispel some of that fear, and be educated. For those of you that have stuck with us, hopefully everyone did, but you will link into the article with some of your information. I mean, your newsletter is very information full of, links that we can go to. However deep you want to go to, you can see the brilliance of what Christopher does and has done. But at least educate yourself, get on some of these, don't be afraid of them. I really liked what you said too with, Chat GPT. It's going to take, because I have used this and there was a question, okay, so where is this information actually coming from? So if I understand digital because I've worked in the music field. I understand how it becomes all digital from analog, and I understand all those numbers and how one little number can change everything and the whole thing. So if it's a series of just numbers and digital things in the background, then it can come up with, how you ask the questions, not to be afraid of that. When my father was in his, 80s, his late 80s, and was texting and learning to, use his phone. I was so proud of him. Although I saved his texts because some of them are so funny. He never proofread them, and they're very, very funny. But we all need to understand that it doesn't matter how old we are or what stage of life, that we can learn many of these principles and use them to our benefit. And also, as people at mid-career wondering what the next chapter is, not to be afraid of some of this learning curve, because you're going to be using, and a lot of the tools, Christopher, like you said, are already employing those. You mentioned Microsoft, you mentioned Google, and but I know, I use Pictory, a video program. I put in text, it'll come up with suggested videos and pictures, which I usually change anyway, but it gives me suggestions. Canva can do the same. A lot of those tools, basic tools, are already using AI. You're not aware of it yet. So what are some other, we've talked about some of the ethical implications. I think that was important. That's important to me as a creator. And what do you think with the limits and guidelines, what the future holds? I mean, we hear Musk saying we need some sort of guidelines here. What are the areas that really need guidelines, and just to educate ourselves, not that we need to go so deep into this?
There is no regulating this technology. There isn't. And here's why. Much of it is open source, which means that it is freely available, freely downloadable. For example, Facebook published its Llama model not too long ago, a couple of months ago now, and made it open source, gave it away to the world. And now anyone can download it or trained versions of it for different tasks. And in the same way that, an open source piece of software like the Apache web server or Mozilla's Thunderbird email software, these companies that have given this away, they have no ability to take it away. Like, yes, Chat GPT could be turned off by OpenAI tomorrow. Yes, that is possible. But GPT for all, the open source software that uses any of these models, you can install it and put it on your laptop today. It will run on your laptop and no one can take it away from you. So the technology is already out there. That horse has left the barn. How people use the technology is like how human beings use anything, right? There are people who are good. There are people who have questionable morals. There are people who are actively seeking to harm others. And the way to think about regulation of this is the way we think about regulation of anything, like a chainsaw, right? If you use a chainsaw to cut down a tree that you have permission to cut down, things are good. There's no trouble, right? If you use a chainsaw to go kill a bunch of people, that's not a good thing, and there are punishments for that. And we have to look at AI tools in the same way, that there are things you should not do with them. And if you do those things, there has to be some sort of reckoning that you did bad things with them. We are seeing, and this is the area that you're going to see a lot of in the next 18 months, and it is going to be, to put it bluntly, a shit show, is they will be used very, very, very heavily within political campaigning. They will be used to create massive factual distortions. And because, and again, not to get on any one particular political perspective, but politics and politicians over the last 10 years have done an exceedingly good job of bonding political ideology to people's identities. Like, I am this kind of person. This is the thing that I am, not what I believe or what I want to talk about. It's bonded to someone's identity, which means that the moment you do that, it's much harder to change someone's identity than to change their mind rationally, right? If someone is, say, Jewish, it's very hard to convince them to not be Jewish, right? That's just who they are, right? And so we've created these political identities, and a side habit of that is that because it's part of identity, you tend to filter out anything that disagrees with your identity because you view it as an attack on yourself. AI is capable of creating massive amounts of content, factually true or not, and people will embrace things that they agree with because it bolsters their sense of identity about who they are as a person. And so you will see these technologies. It's already happening. It's happening right now in some of the early primaries. People are using voice cloning technology to create realistic, very good quality impersonations of others. There's one of past and current U.S. presidents playing video games, right? And that was a funny example. Like, they're yelling at each other. It's very amusing, but it sounds like them. I was experimenting with one of the voice cloning technologies with a friend, and I was able to have it create effectively a very realistic ransom note. I had it say, she was saying, "Oh, help! I'm being held by these people. If you just wire some money to this account, they'll let me go." And she said, my friend said, the only way my parents would know that wasn't me was because I used the wrong word for mother in it. She says, "I say mummy, I don't say mum." She was British. And she said that would be the only clue that was not me. Right. So these technologies exist. They are in the wild now. So the cat is out of the bag, and we have to be clear, help our elected leaders and our governments understand what is possible, because they don't. They're really they're just starting to figure out that social media can be bad. 20 years later.
Yes.
And so the idea of what these tools are capable of and how they can be misused or used for nefarious purposes is really important. They do not understand that in the slightest. And two, as individuals, we have to challenge ourselves to say, okay, well, how much of other people's ideologies have we absorbed into our identity? And is that preventing us from thinking critically, from saying, well, my favorite politician said this. Is that actually true? Very few people do that. Very few people are willing to do that because, again, it conflicts with what you think is your identity.
That is such a great point. And to use common sense, I just wrote a blog on that, or a article, and did a podcast on it, because this was back with our founding fathers. And to use, God has given us an intellect and a brain to be able to think through these, but we are so influenced by the media, by our social media, everything that we have. So, and I think some of your warnings are really well documented. It's like fishing on steroids right now, that you can get, you get some of those messages. And now there's a realistic video, there's pictures, there's the voice that sounds real. My father was fooled by, one of those phishing things, and ended up, paying money for gift cards from one of these. And because he was afraid of one of his grandkids being kidnapped. This is very dangerous, especially for the elderly, even more so to watch out for those around you and just to be aware of this. I think that's a great warning, Christopher, and it's going to be ramped up in the next 18 months. There's news reports about this all the time, that it is going to be. We know this is coming. So just be aware of it, have some conversations about it, and be prudent. Use your own common sense as well, and do your own research. I think as a writer, I love I've got to have good sources. You've got to look at where those sources, what's the actual research? You don't just look on blogs, you look at the actual research. And Christopher, you are one of those that does the research. So, I appreciate your work.
I'm cautious of that because, again, this is where identity interferes, right? Do your own research is sort of a rallying cry for read the things you want to read. And one thing that people have to get comfortable with is consuming information that they disagree with. I mean, this is one of the biggest problems we have with like classical machine learning and attribution analysis in marketing. Attribution analysis takes a look at your data and says, here's what's generating results. If you've got a pet program, like, oh, this is my email marketing program is my favorite program. Well, and the attribution analysis says, nope, it's not working. You're like, can you be comfortable being uncomfortable that something you like isn't working? And this extends to AI as a whole, right? Can you be comfortable with things that you disagree with? And can you be comfortable when evidence, like peer-reviewed, fact-based evidence, says what you believe is wrong, right? What you believe is just factually untrue. That can be really, really challenging for a lot of people. And most people, has been my experience, most people are not willing to make that leap.
Well, they're not willing to admit that they may have been misled either. Yeah, I mean, this is human nature. We don't want to admit that we failed. We don't want to admit that we might have looked at the wrong source. Every source is not. You can look at, my husband's been in you've met my husband before, he's been in the financial field. He has this head for numbers. But he said, you can make numbers say anything you want to, if you look at different, so you have to understand where it's coming from. That is extremely important. And I agree with that, Christopher. So, and to use our common sense and not be afraid of pursuing and having conversations, I think, in the future, and to look at different viewpoints. Don't be confused by, there's 10 viewpoints on this now. Do I have to choose? No, just, use, who you are. This is why your core values, everything else comes into play with all of this. So, and not to be afraid of it, take away some of the fear. So, because it's here. AI is here, machine learning is here. Technology is moving exponentially now. I mean, it's moving so quickly, and this over anybody that else I think that I know, Christopher. So
I know it was terrifying. I was writing the fourth edition of my book. I was writing chapter 3, and as I was writing the chapter, it went out of date. Like, well, I'm just going to stop.
Wow. Well, good for you for updating. My goodness.
But as well as seriously, I cannot update this book fast enough to keep up with it, because even the things like, for example, Google released a new version of its software, Bard. The way you write prompts for Chat GPT does not work as well on Bard. It has a different architecture. If you use Vicuna or Llama or Alpaca and these other models, they all have their own prompt structure too for optimum results. And those models are changing every couple of days, right? That's how fast they update. And so at a certain point, you're like, well, I guess we'll just go with what's happening and understand that there is no one size fits all for any of this stuff. And a big part of evaluating different solutions is figuring out which solution fits your budget, your workflow, your technical capabilities, and saying, okay, that's probably for now going to be good enough.
And I like that point, because I usually encourage people that I work with, stick with the basics, understand where you are, and then find something basically that works. You don't have to get into all of the different code areas that you just listed that people, would lose most people. You'll lose me on some of those. So it's important to stick with what you have. And you had even mentioned this earlier, to stick with where you are at and grow from there. Don't be afraid of it, but just grow from there. And understand some of the things that you're using now already incorporate this. So just understand that it's going to keep keep moving. So just as we, there's so much more we can talk about, Christopher. I just don't want to make this hours long. But I do want to know what's next for Christopher Penn. I mean, you've just worked on your 4th edition of one of your books. So, but what is next for you, and how can people reach you?
I am consistently trying to learn more and keep up with stuff as it's happening. I am lecturing literally all over the world on this topic. I just did, if you can believe it, I just lectured at a major healthcare systems OBGYN department about the use of AI. I'm like, okay, this is a new area which I am profoundly unqualified to be talking about. But here we are. In terms of finding me, there's 2 places you can find me. For anything work-related, trustinsights.ai is my company's website. If you want help understanding this technology and how your company could be using it, we certainly do a consultation on that. And then my personal website is christopherspenn.com. That's where my weekly newsletter is and things. So those are probably the 2 places that are easiest for people to find. And then, you can go to all the different places from there.
Oh, great. Christopher, this has been just fantastic. I know there's so much more you can talk about. I mean, it's just because this field is huge, and but I really have enjoyed our conversation, and hopefully it makes people think, and it makes people, dispels. So that was one of the outcomes I wanted, is to dispel some of the fear and also enlighten a little bit on some of the possibilities, because I will list some of those possibilities in the article. So make sure you get that, goalsforyourlife.com/newsletter. You can also get a hold of me with Deborah Johnson Speaker, DJ Works Music. People love the music, Christopher. They're just always, oh, what music do you have come out? All of that. They just love that. But this is very important in helping people move ahead using their skills, experience, resources, not to be afraid of using some of the technical tools available. And it really does, it prompts some of the imagination. I get so many requests, and how can I add more creativity in what I'm doing, so analytical, and you can get ideas. Yeah, basically you can. I have so many ideas. I have to stop. My husband says, no more. Stop, focus on what I'm doing. But a lot of people are looking for some of those ideas. So it can prompt some of those ideas. Well, last words before I let everybody go and you go and all of this. I mean,
it really is. Take a look at what's possible, understand what's possible, and understand that every career that involves knowledge or information is going to be dramatically impacted by this stuff. And going back to what we started with, the person who's skilled with AI will take the job of the person who is not.
Wow, that's great. I mean, that's a great statement right there. So to encourage us all not to be afraid of it, you can make it simple. There are simple tools, and just understanding that. So, well, Christopher, thanks again for being with us today. Thank you, everyone, for being with us and listening. Make sure that you get all of our material coming up, and especially make sure that you get a hold of this article, because I think you'll enjoy some of those links and to be able to communicate with Christopher a little bit more too. So thanks again, everyone, for being with us, and I will look forward to being with you again next time. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you for joining us. It is because of our wonderful listeners like you that we keep going strong week after week. We'd love it if you'd share and follow us to not miss a single show, and even write a review. You can also find all of our articles, products, and links at womenathalftime.com.